Okay, real talk. What would you do if tomorrow your job just vanished? No alarm, no emails, no Monday, no boss asking you to circle back on something that could have been a text. Just freedom. If your gut reaction is, that sounds amazing, congrats. You just had the exact same thought every single human had for about 300,000 years. Because for most of history, that was life every single day. No concept of a work week, no 5 days of suffering for 2 days of barely recovering. That whole system, totally made up. And honestly, one of the worst things we ever invented. So here's the question that should genuinely mess with your head. What did ancient humans actually do all day? Hour by hour, dawn to dusk. No Netflix, no phone, no job, no nothing. The answer? It's going to surprise you. Because it turns out the people we spent centuries calling primitive were actually living better than most of us are right now. And I'm not being dramatic. The evidence is everywhere once you start looking. Here's the story we've all been told about prehistoric life. Ancient human wakes up, tries not to get eaten, grunts a little, fails to invent anything useful, dies at 30. The end. That's wrong. Almost completely wrong. And the funny part? We believed it because of the evidence we found. Bones with cut marks, weapons, animal remains. And we went, yep, brutal survival, all day, every day. But wait, we also found cave paintings. We found musical instruments made from bird bones and mammoth ivory going back 40,000 years. We found jewelry, necklaces made from shells and carefully drilled stones. We found evidence of people walking hundreds of miles on foot with no roads, no GPS, no Uber, just to trade pigments for body paint. And then there's this. We found graves of elderly people who had survived decades with serious physical disabilities, buried carefully, with ceremony, sometimes surrounded by flowers. That is not a species in constant survival panic. That's a species that had time on their hands. A lot of it, and was doing genuinely interesting things with it. In the 1960s, an anthropologist named Marshall Salins did something wild. He actually studied modern hunter-gatherer groups to figure out what daily life looked like before agriculture flipped everything upside down. He looked at the Kung San people of the Kalahari, the Hadza of Tanzania, Aboriginal groups in Australia, and what he found? It basically blew up everything. On average, these groups spent somewhere between 3 and 5 hours a day on what you'd call work. Hunting, gathering, preparing food, fixing tools, maintaining shelter. 3 to 5 hours. The rest of the day, genuinely free. Talking, resting, playing, making music, making art, telling stories, hanging out. Salins called them the original affluent society. Not because they had a lot of stuff, they had almost nothing, and that was on purpose, because everything you own is something you have to carry, but because they had the one thing every modern person desperately wants and almost never gets: time. Actual, unscheduled, no one is bothering me, free time. Now compare that to you, between your job, your commute, your errands, your responsibilities. The average adult today has about 2.5 to 3 hours of real leisure per day, if they're lucky. And most of that spent doom scrolling or watching something an algorithm picked specifically to keep you anxious enough to not turn it off. We are more stressed, more overworked, and more exhausted than people who hunted animals with sticks. Let that sit for a second. So what did they do with all that free time? A few things that are going to hit different than you'd expect. They talked constantly. Anthropologists who've studied hunter-gatherer groups found that somewhere between 60 to 70% of all social time was spent in conversation. And not tactical stuff, not just the river runs south from here. They gossiped, they told jokes, they argued, they flirted, they complained about each other. They told stories about things that happened years ago. Robin Dunbar, the guy behind Dunbar's Number, actually argues that language itself evolved as a form of social bonding. Other primates groom each other physically to build trust. But as human groups grew bigger, You just couldn't physically groom 80 people. There aren't enough hours. So we evolved conversation to do the same job at scale. Gossip isn't a character flaw. It's literally the oldest social technology humans ever developed. So the next time you spend an evening just talking and laughing with people you love, you're doing exactly what your ancestors did around a campfire 50,000 years ago. That's not wasted time. That is the point. They didn't sleep the way we do. This one genuinely freaks people out. The idea of sleeping 8 straight hours at night, almost certainly a modern invention, forced on us by artificial lighting and factory schedules. Historian Roger Ekirch spent over 2 decades digging through old documents, diaries, court records, medical texts, and found that before electric lights existed, most people slept in 2 phases. First sleep from dusk until around midnight, then naturally waking up for an hour or two, then second sleep until dawn. During that middle of the night window, they didn't stress about it. They got up, talked with family, prayed, had sex, visited neighbors. Some people used it specifically for creative thinking, the kind of deep focus the busy daytime didn't allow. So if you ever wake up at 2 a.m. feeling oddly alert and calm, wondering what's wrong with you, maybe nothing. Your body might just be doing what human bodies did for hundreds of thousands of years. You're just missing the campfire. They made art that still blows people's minds. The cave paintings at Chauvet in France, potentially 36,000 years old. These aren't crude scribbles. They're sophisticated, dynamic, compositionally stunning. Horses mid-gallop, bison turning their heads, lions hunting in packs. The artists used the natural curves of the cave walls to give animals 3-dimensional form, so that by flickering firelight, the horses and bison would appear to actually move. They built cinematic illusion into stone walls in the dark, 36,000 years ago. Someone lay on their back on a cold cave floor for hours, not because it fed anyone, not because they had to, because they had something to say, and they wanted it to last. Here's the detail that gets the least attention, and honestly, the one that matters the most. We found skeletons of ancient individuals with severe, lifelong disabilities, people who couldn't contribute to the group in any conventional physical way, and yet they survived for years, for decades, because someone took care of them. There was a Neanderthal found in Iraq, Shanidar I, who had a withered arm, partial blindness, significant hearing loss, and serious leg injuries, and he lived into old age because his group kept him alive. These weren't cold, brutal, every man for himself survivors. They were people who looked after each other. So what's the actual takeaway here? Ancient humans weren't primitive. They weren't desperate. They weren't spending every second just trying to survive. They had rich social lives, deep skills, creative expression, rest, play, community. In a lot of ways, they had things figured out that we're still desperately trying to get back. And maybe the most humbling part of all this, the things that made them thrive, real conversation, genuine rest, creativity, taking care of each other, none of that required money. None of it required technology. It just required time and the choice to use it well. We've got the technology. We've just forgotten what it's for.